No one in God's great creation gives themselves over to Christmas more than Morley's neighbor, Mary Turlington. To the season and the spirit behind it, to be sure, but not only to the season and the spirit, to the whole 9 yards, to all the noise that surrounds Christmas. I've chosen my Christmas color, Mary announced triumphantly to her husband Bert one night in July. I'm doing cinnamon this year. Notice it's not we're doing cinnamon. For Mary Turlington, Christmas is a solo sport. We'll need a copper tree, she said to Bert a few days later. And catch that shift. An important distinction. Mary writes the score, but Mary expects her husband Bert to be in the band. By right of marriage, Bert is enlisted, inducted, and suited up. Mary, who's taken up with and over by Christmas every year, became particularly focused on this Christmas some 6 weeks ago. Until 6 weeks ago, Mary believed that her mother and her sister's husband and their 4 children and her brother and his kids were all coming to her house for Christmas. But one by one, her family bailed. Her brother got a new job and couldn't afford the time away. Her sister's husband got sick. Her mother called and said, I don't know. If no one else is coming, maybe I should stay at home. Anyone else might have been disappointed. Anyone else so caught up in Christmas preparations might have fallen apart. What's the point, they might have asked. I work so darn hard, no one cares. Mary didn't fall apart. Mary dug deeper. Means we can do things my way for a change, she said to Bert. Apparently, Mary, who had been all about control, had also been all about compromise. I thought I was going to have to do a turkey again this year, said Mary. Emma's so conservative on the question of turkey. On the question of turkey at Christmas, Bert felt pretty conservative himself. But he was conservative enough not to admit it. Instead of being unsettled that her plans were unraveling, Mary was becoming unleashed. She was Mary unshackled. Well, what do you think of henna, she said to Bert one night. Who, said Bert. If we hennaed your hair, said Mary. Think of how nice you'd go with a copper tree. Mary had apparently shifted into some previously undiscovered Christmas gear. And Bert, who had always been delighted by his wife's Christmas cheer, was beginning to feel something that was not delight. It was a bigger feeling than delight, a worrying sort of feeling. Fear. Bert was fearful that Mary's Christmas was about to overtake him. He felt like the Cadillac in that song about the Little Nash Rambler. Beep, beep, said Bert. What, said Mary? Oh, nothing, said Bert. As Christmas got closer, Mary set out their collection of Christmas candles. A parade of little paraffin men and women in chipped red and yellow choir robes. I know they're cheesy, she said, but I love these things more than anything. The candles had been in Mary's family since before she was born. Mary's parents had bought the choir master and his wife on their very first Christmas together. A man and a woman singing their little paraffin hearts out. Mary's mother had added to the candle collection each time she had a child. And when her children married, she added wax figures for each husband and wife. And then for each of the grandchildren. After 50 Christmases, there were now 23 candles that lived 11 months of the year wrapped in tissue at the bottom of a shoebox and spent the holiday season marching along the mantle, the 2 original candles at the head of the paraffin parade. Only 1 candle had ever been lit when Mary's sister's husband left her for his aerobics instructor. Mary's mother burned his candle in the front window on Halloween. She scraped what remained of the candle off the window frame, wrapped the little wax puddle in beautiful gold foil, and mailed it to the ex-husband the following Christmas. Ever since then, the candles have assumed iconic status in the family. Every Christmas, Mary's mother picks up her candle and says, "Maybe when I die, you could light mine and put it on my coffin." "We'll never light them," said Mary. "Never, ever." Mary found a local welder to make her copper tree. He came to the house and measured their living room door early in December. "I won't be able to use copper," he said. "I'm going to use steel. But it'll be oxidized steel, so it'll be copper-colored. It'll look sort of, he was searching for the right word. "Dead," said Bert. That was the night when Mary told Bert she had settled on scallops for Christmas dinner. "I'm going to poach them in saffron," she said, "so they'll look nice with the tree." And that was the moment that galvanized Bert. That was the moment Bert decided the time for action had come. Bert was standing in his driveway when lightning struck. Well, not literally lightning, but close to it. There was a flash and a loud clap, and Bert jumped back, his hands flying up to protect his head. And then, as he stood there, a giant set of fiberglass reindeer antlers fell out of the sky and planted themselves in the front lawn right beside him. Bert stared at the vibrating antlers, thinking how ironic it would have been, given his current situation, to have been taken out by a giant Christmas decoration. And then he looked up, and he spotted his neighbor, Dave, running down the sidewalk. Dave with his face covered in soot and his eyebrows singed. "You'll never believe what just happened," said Dave. And it was suddenly obvious to Bert what had to happen. Mary needed to be distracted, or Christmas, as Bert knew and loved it, was going to be lost. And if Mary's family weren't going to show up and do the job, Bert needed someone else to take up the slack. Someone who rubbed up against his wife a bit, the way her sister did. Someone to preoccupy her. "Hey," said Bert. "Dave, how are you?" And that is why 2 weeks later, at 2 o'clock on Christmas afternoon, Morley looked at her husband across the mess of their living room and said, "If we're going to get to the Turlingtons on time, we better start getting ready right now." Dave was standing by the couch in his pajamas, knee-deep in wrapping paper. He was holding Morley's present. It looked like it had been wrapped by a small animal with no opposable thumbs. "This is for you," he said, holding the package out. And he kicked his way across the room towards Morley as if it was an October afternoon and he was kicking his way through a leaf-strewn park. "I love you," he said. Sam, 12 years old, and crawling through the paper toward the back of the tree like a caver, stopped dead and looked over his shoulders at his parents, and he said, "Will you two please stop talking like that in front of me? It's inappropriate." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon at Dave's house, Christmas was still in full swing. 2 doors down the street, however, at Christmas Central, 2 doors down the street at the Turlingtons' house, there was very little evidence that Christmas had even happened. The Turlington twins had already taken their presents back to their rooms, and they had put things away in their drawers and cupboards. And while Sam dove under another pile of paper as if he were snorkeling, the Turlington twins, dressed in their matching Christmas sweaters, were sitting at the dining room table writing out their thank you cards. 21-year-old Adam Turlington was sitting on the sofa, carefully folding wrapping paper and sorting it into 2 neatly labeled boxes. One marked recycle, the other marked reuse. Mary Turlington was vacuuming in a pair of gold kitten heel shoes. And soon these 2 different cultures were going to be brought under the same roof. Dave and Morley and Sam and Stephanie were heading up the Turlingtons walk. And now, as they stood on the Turlington stoop, Morley turned and she took Dave's arm at the elbow and she said, "Best behavior." "Very best," said Dave, nodding earnestly. And he meant it. They were both thinking of other dinners at the Turlingtons, the competitive strain, the abrasive political discussions. Dave took a deep breath. "Very best," he said again. And then Dave reached out and he rang the Turlingtons' bell. Mary opened the door and stared at Dave, and there was an uncomfortable beat before anyone said anything. Mary in a long black evening gown, gold earrings, her hair a strangely artificial shade of orange, her hair sprayed and pulled tightly back into a bun. Mary standing there like she was expecting the Queen and finding a man from the stables instead. Mary in her formal dress and Dave in his cords and a flannel shirt. If you could have seen inside of them, you could have watched both of their hearts sinking, both of them thinking, "How did I get myself into this?" And before either of them had time for a second thought, Dave saw Mary Turlington's Christmas tree for the first time. It had a steel trunk and steel branches and steel needles and steel decorations. And Dave, who had been expecting greenery when he glanced into the living room, blinked. To Dave, the tree looked rusty. Tree looked sharp, like some kind of giant corroded medieval weapon, or a bombed-out electrical tower left rotting in the fields of some war-torn country. And those are the thoughts that were tumbling through Dave's mind as he stood in the hall with his mouth hanging open. And the very first words that came out of his mouth were not, "Happy Christmas, Mary," or "Mary, you look wonderful." The first words out of Dave's mouth were, "My God." "What happened to your tree?" Morley saw Mary's jaw twitch and thought she heard a faraway whoosh. It was the sound of an evening of merriment being sucked out of the house. Dave glanced helplessly at Morley. I'm trying, his expression seemed to say. Morley stared back. "Try harder." And then Bert was ushering everyone into the living room, posing them around the rusting tree, chatting with forced cheeriness. He pulled out his new digital camera. "Everyone smile," said Bert, hopefully. And Dave did try harder. In an effort to show Mary that he appreciated her hospitality, Dave sunk his hand into a bowl of gourmet snack mix that was on the hall table. As soon as he popped the stuff into his mouth, he knew he had a problem. He glanced down at the bowl. There were dried cranberries in there and what looked like bits of cinnamon stick. But what he thought were tiny potato chips were now looking suspiciously like the stuff you might use at the bottom of a hamster cage. Dave's teeth grinded away at what he now realized were cedar shavings. And it dawned on him that he was eating Mary's Christmas potpourri. When he looked up to see if anyone had noticed, he saw Mary staring at him from the other side of the living room. So instead of spitting into his hand, which is what he wanted to do, Dave smiled gamely and swallowed. Bert handed Morley a glass of wine and reached for his camera. "Hold it there, Dave," said Bert. The more Dave tried, the worse things got. Just don't touch anything, whispered Morley, taking a clove-studded orange from Dave's hand. Everyone was in the kitchen, and everyone was busy. Morley was tossing the salad. Bert was taking pictures. Mary was dusting the turkey with cinnamon. "Well, what can I do?" whispered Dave to Morley. Just be helpful," said Morley. "Just look around for something that needs doing and just do it, don't ask." Dave couldn't see anything that needed doing in the kitchen, so he went in the dining room. There were flower petals and little pieces of bronze-colored glitter all over the dining room table. Dave went to the hall closet and got the hand vac and hoovered them up. Then he picked up a pack of matches from the buffet and headed toward the mantel. One by one, he lit the wicks in the heads of the little wax choir. A few of the oldest figures burned remarkably fast. The little wax puddle at the top of their heads sunk into their skulls, so the flame of the candle shone through their eyes. It gave them a slightly demonic look. It would be more dramatic, thought Dave, if he dimmed the room lights. That way the candles would be the first thing you saw when you came into the room. They were certainly the first thing that Mary saw when she came into the room. She was carrying a salmon appetizer. They managed to pick most of the salmon off the floor before the Turlingtons' dog got too much. Dave scooped up the biggest piece and wiped it off on a napkin. 5-second rule, he said, grinning. Hold it right there, said Bert, reaching for his camera. Somehow or other, they managed to get through the meal. After the candles and the salmon fiasco, Mary had headed back into the kitchen like an army general determined to overcome defeat in the field. Bert kept jumping up and blinding everyone with a flash of his camera at regular intervals, and Morley hung on to her wine glass like a drowning woman clutching a life preserver. In fact, by the time the turkey was finished, things seemed to have settled down so nicely that Dave felt it might just be safe to help out again. He headed into the kitchen to see about the plum pudding. You'll need more than that, said Dave, as he watched Mary douse the pudding with a shot glass of liquor. Now, whether or not she did need more is a moot point. Point is, if Mary had added just a little more, everything might have been all right. But she didn't. Mary wasn't about to let Dave tell her how things should be done in her kitchen. So instead of adding just a little more brandy, Mary looked at Dave icily and she said, "That'll be plenty." And Dave, moved by only the best of intentions, Dave, not wanting anything more to go wrong, waited until Mary wasn't looking and gave the pudding an extra shot of brandy anyway. And Mary, not wanting to be proved wrong about how much brandy you needed to light a plum pudding, waited until Dave wasn't looking and gave it 2 extra shots herself. So the pudding was well and truly soaked when Mary carried it to the table and struck a match. There was a whoosh and a bright blue flash, and the pudding went up like a Roman candle. A number of things caught fire. Most spectacularly, the cinnamon-colored silk ribbon that Mary had wrapped around the bun at the top of her head. The ribbon acted like a wick. And in an instant, blue flames were shooting out of Mary's heavily hairsprayed hair. She stood stock still there by the table, holding the match in front of her, looking like the Statue of Liberty on fire. Bert jumped for his camera. Unfortunately, it was Dave who put her out. He used a pitcher of eggnog. It was hours later, after Mary's hair had been put out, and the dining room generally hosed down, and the twins in bed, and Dave and Morley safe at home, that Mary's sister Emma phoned. Mary took the portable phone into the den while Bert finished tidying in the kitchen. "Emmy sent her love," said Mary when she returned. Her eyes were red. She'd obviously been crying. "I guess I miss her," she said. I hadn't thought of her all day. I hadn't missed her at all, but, I've never had a Christmas without her. Did you know that? "Did you tell her about the candles?" said Bert. "And the pudding," said Mary, wiping her eyes on the sleeve of her plaid shirt. "She reminded me of the Christmas the dog ate the turkey, and the time Adam knocked the tree over. Remember that?" "Family and friends," said Bert. "Family and friends. They sure mess up our lives." "They sure do," said Mary. But she was smiling now. "They sure do." Thank you very much.